Chair, with your permission, I'm going to start to launch us into the next phase of this so that we can get done to have lunch. Okay, if I can ask the folks at the back to have a seat, please. Chuck? Shh. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move now into a phase in which we are going to have the votes, and with votes, we will further deliberate upon the evidence and have votes both on clinical effectiveness and potential other benefits and contextual considerations. So to help, just to make sure that the CEPAC is logged in and ready to vote, I'm going to ask Ellie to come forward and just do a test voting question.
All right, everybody should be logged in, and we're going to do, this is our test voting question. Maggie's here, she's going to help you if you are not logged in. You got it? Okay. So as soon as you are able to log in, you can answer this test question, which is, which skyscraper became the tallest building in Chicago when it was completed in 1973? I think we should have a 100% rate on getting this question correct.
How many numbers do we have?
18, 17. 17.
17. So we're still waiting for 6 more.
Okay, 5 more.
You want to start marking? All right. Getting there. Good. 2 more. We're still missing 2 votes, and it looks like I can see the folks who are working on it. Tension is mounting. One more to go. All right. All right, but I'm glad everybody's in just about. All right. And the answer is, or you think it is, Sears Tower was a clear winner. Ellie, what's the answer? That is the correct answer. We have to ask more questions about things that aren't in the Midwest. These people all know these answers. That's good, though. All right. So that shows that we know how to vote, and I'm going to ask, as we go through the voting questions, I will ask the CEPAC, remind them that it's healthy practice to wait to vote until you have heard all the questions and comments made about that particular question, even if going into the vote you think you already know what you're going to say. So hold off, and I will indicate when the right time is to start to enter your votes. Okay, and just to note again, we've got the ICER research team and our collaborators at that table over there. We have the folks representing the patient community and clinical experts here again. So let's talk through. The first voting question is, in patients with active SPMS, so you can guess that the following question will be about non-active. In patients with active SPMS, is the evidence adequate to demonstrate that the net health benefit provided by siponimod is superior to that provided by best supportive care? And let me just, I guess, invite the ICER team. David or Ravi, could you just quickly summarize again from the evidence summary or otherwise what the thinking of the ICER team was and the evidence rating supporting this question?
The overall effect and the primary endpoint was 3-month CDP, which was reported in the entire SPMS population. Multiple analyses with caveats that they were subgroup analyses. Some pre-specified, some post-hoc did show a consistent benefit in patients that were considered to be active and lesser benefit often without statistical significance in patients that would be considered inactive.
Okay. And the evidence rating we gave it, this was the B+. Right, okay. Questions or further comments? I know that, again, we do spend part of the morning delving into these issues. You've already heard from the clinical experts to a certain extent on this topic, on this particular issue. But let me focus again on your guys. Any questions or comments about how you see the evidence here and issues you'd like to raise before the vote? Yes, John. Make sure that you use your mic, please.
So I really wish I had a choice which in which I could say potentially likely, meaning it's not be binary, meaning yes or no, meaning it. But then the fact that we have only the binary choice offered, so that's why I would go for yes for this question.
Okay. Yeah, we don't give you guys the nice easy outs of the maybe on Sundays, if you look at it from this direction, but yeah, that's the way we spend our academic lives. Here, it's partly to be consistent with the general idea that ultimately decision-making bodies do have to weigh a lot of uncertainties and different issues and make binary decisions. But we want to add context where it's helpful, for sure. That's part of the purpose of the discussion. Tim.
So I'm sure there's going to be a question in here, but there's probably a comment. So to reiterate, I think from what I saw was that there was a single trial, that there was some definite methodologic concerns about enrollment and analysis. There's some questions regarding the population enrolled and the accuracy of SPMS in the enrollees. There was some concerns about the outcome used to assess effectiveness at 3 months, potentially biasing towards a benefit. We have really essentially no data on long-term effects. And my understanding is that there's concerns about harms with regard to that may not be fully captured in this trial. And so then I guess it gets back to, is that really adequate? And then that many of the outcomes were not significant and small. And then finally, I don't know if a test for interaction was ever done to look to see if there's really effect modification rather than just a p-value for the subgroup. So I'm rambling, but I am not seeing adequate information in the population that's noted up there.
Right. Since you raised a very specific question about the statistical testing, let me let the team comment on that, or we can ask the manufacturer if our team doesn't know.
So
maybe if any of my comments were inaccurate.
So let me comment on a couple of things there. One is in terms of the subgroup interaction, if you don't believe the subgroups, then you should say that you can't both not believe the subgroups and not believe the group as a whole. So they had statistical significance and showed benefit on the group as a whole. So it's not really fair to go, well, this subgroup did better than the group as a whole, and I'm not going to believe that it showed benefit in the subgroup that did better than the group as a whole, and I'm not going to believe that the group as a whole. You kind of have to pick one, I think. We felt that a priori, we thought that it was reasonable to look at these subgroups. We did not look at a test of interaction because our a priori position was that it was more appropriate to look at the subgroups than at the group as a whole. I think this was a large trial. I think there were reasonable questions about whether some of these people didn't have SPMS and had late RRMS. But I suspect that if we asked our experts whether they believe that there's adequate evidence that for the DMTs that mostly haven't been studied specifically in an SPMS population, that there's adequate evidence that they have benefit in active relapsing SPMS to decrease relapses, they would tell us without a clinical trial, even specifically in that population, that they believe that they have high certainty of a small benefit in patients who have ongoing active relapses. And I'll put that to them.
So I would agree with you, but I would also emphasize that the study was designed to be looked at as a whole, as you've pointed out, and that it wasn't powered or designed really to be looked at in terms of the isolated subgroups. Those were post hoc analyses that were done subsequently.
Now, just to comment on the power issue, because I don't think it's fair when we get to the next slide about non-active disease to say that it wasn't statistically significant and so it didn't work in non-active disease for exactly that reason. It wasn't powered to answer that. It's not fair to look at the confidence interval and say it went above 1 and so therefore we don't think it works. I think we have other reasons to be worried about non-active disease.
And secondly, I would say that this reflects the real-world secondary progressive population. Okay? The people don't come in defined as active, non-active. Those are labels that are assigned by the individual who's evaluating them based on the information that they have, either in terms of following that individual or in terms of acquiring information from that individual. Furthermore, that there's not precision in that. And these categories are descriptors. Okay? They're not pathologic definitions. They're not telling us all of the disease activity that's going on. They're only our best ability to characterize what we see at the clinical level, which is only a fraction of what we know from other more detailed imaging and pathologic studies is going on at the biological level.
Right. Go ahead, Annetta.
So I agree with your first point that, we do use a lot of these medications in people at the transition between relapsing remitting and SPMS where they're still having some inflammatory activity. I do think it works in that population. I think that is essentially the conclusion that was come to is like we either have to come down on one way or the other, that they recruited a bunch of people at that transition point, and that's how they got a positive overall effect, but yet had some inconsistencies in the other endpoints, or we accept this as a fully SPMS population. I will take issue with what Dr. Cohen said. This is not a representative population of SPMS patients that are out there. That is my concern on a population level. Anne had described her mother. We see a lot of patients like that are much further along in the disease. These patients were not treated in these trials, and these patients are the ones at highest risk of complications from heavy-dose immunosuppressants, drugs that cause seizures, and drugs that cause dizziness and falls like this one does.
I would just like to make a comment, whether it's active or non-active SPMS. I was on Copaxone for 15 years. I loved the drug. I thought it was a fabulous drug. And after 15 years, my neurologist said, Anne, it's really not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Well, at that point, I didn't have any SPMS drugs available to me, and that's why he put me on Rituxan. He's a definite think out of the box kind of neurologist, which I appreciate, but if I had had this available to me, I may not have had to go to Rituxan. I could have had this available to me. So my hope is that you people that are voting can find it in your ways to say, you know what, we need this because there's really nothing out there for the SPMS population.
And I just thank you for that comment. I totally understand the concern. Often we deal at the CEPAC with the tension between votes on the evidence and what people interpret that will mean for coverage or pricing. So in a sense, we have given guidance to the CEPAC to vote not in a way that they intend for it to be implemented, but to reflect their judgment of the evidence. And in the roundtable, which is coming up ever quicker than I'd hoped, we'll talk very much about how we would translate what evidence there is, the concerns about it, et cetera, into coverage and pricing. And that's where I think your concern will have center stage, for sure. Yes, Ryan.
Quick clarification question. Annette, just what you just said. So if most of the population in the study was at the cusp of relapsing remitting and SPMS, are the drugs that are out there on the market, are they effective with that population?
Or for reducing the risk of relapse, yes, but that's different than the insidious progression. Where I think my concern is that this is going to get used off-label in the patients where we don't really see strong. Question 2, we don't see consistent evidence of benefit. We already have some concerns about the consistency of benefit in the overall trial population, and yet we know the risks go up. And I'll just make one last comment. In the United States, and this is Kaiser data. So I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you this, but when we look at all of our prescribing practices, no matter what drug we're talking about for MS, 25 to 30% of patients on those drugs have either a walker, wheelchair, hospital bed, or Hoyer lift. So it is very common in this country to prescribe off-label to people with very advanced disease.
All right. Now, partly given our time, I'm going to take some liberties, and I know we've had some of the discussion that we'll need to address the next question as well. But seeing no cards up, let's go ahead and have you vote, please. So A is yes. I assume it shows up as A on your choice there. B is no. All right, and results are 15 yes and 2 no. And I think we've heard a good discussion about some of the concerns about the evidence that would support these. And since it was so overwhelmingly yes, I think we're going to go ahead at this point to the next voting question. So again, the same question for the non-active group. And again, really briefly from our report, just to summarize it, because we've kind of already done it, but the thinking.
The only thing I want to point out is that in the version of our report that was initially sent to you, we had said that we thought this was promising but inconclusive. That was before the FDA report came out, and we were able to see the concerns the FDA had, and we downgraded our rating in this situation from promising but inconclusive to insufficient. So we were more hopeful before we saw that report.
And David, could you say again, because you mentioned it just a second ago, not the p-value or the confidence interval, but other aspects that you think raise greater questions about the findings in the non-active group?
It may be in the evidence summary. I'm trying to pull it out as I talk, but there was the graph that Ravi showed where you looked at the people who had had no relapses on the study and who had not had any relapses for 5 years previously, and you just couldn't see an effect in those patients. So that was one concern. And then they had various methodologic concerns which heightened things overall. But even without those methodologic concerns, we had thought, and I think that Novartis tried very hard in those analyses, the post hoc analyses, to try to separate out the patients, and that those were interesting studies that led us to think that perhaps there was some benefit in that population, and we weren't quite sure why the FDA had made the decision they had. Once we saw the FDA analyses where they did several things to try to look at the patients who really weren't relapsing, there's just nothing convincing there right now that this works for progression independent of relapse. That doesn't mean that it couldn't turn out that it works. We're not giving it a this does not work rating. We're saying that we think the data are insufficient right now.
Okay. Clinical experts, any perspective?
I agree. I think that if that's what Novartis wants, they actually need to do a trial in a purely progressive SPMS population like they did with natalizumab.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you. All right. Why don't we go ahead and vote on this one? Okay. 17 no, 0 yes. The FDA will be pleased with that vote, probably, given their decision. All right, so let's shift to an important part of the discussion, which is for patients with SPMS, and here we're not splitting them, does siponimod offer one or more of the following potential other benefits or disadvantages versus best supportive care that are not adequately captured in the clinical trial data or base case cost-effectiveness model results? And just to make, again, just a brief comment about why we asked the question. It sounds very technical in a way, but the goal is to say that this condition and treatments for it do have ramifications outside of what clinical trials measure. We know that. families know it, researchers know it. The question is whether there's something about siponimod that may offer specific benefits versus nothing, basically best supportive care for this patient group, that it would be important for policymakers to keep in mind when they are designing coverage policy, clinical guidelines, whatever it might be. So as you see the list here, it's reduced caregiver or family burden. It represents a novel mechanism of action or approach. It has a significant impact on improving return to work or overall productivity, or some other benefit that we should identify for policymakers. Aaron?
So this is one of the rare times when I actually feel there's like almost a disadvantage. Unless I was not understanding correctly, it doesn't feel like it's the opposite of a novel mechanism of action or approach, that there is a generic which is incredibly similar, that this doesn't have a better profile for harm or action or anything else. So it will be unnovel and more expensive, and I'm not sure if it's not adding anything at all. I'm happy to be told I'm wrong, but I'm not.
No, I wouldn't identify that as a specific disadvantage. We usually find something else in it.
But so much more.
Oh, no, but the cost the cost is captured hopefully in the incremental cost effectiveness analysis. So if it were something else that you think would add more to the cost than we've been able to capture. But your point is that this does not offer a benefit of having a new approach or mechanism of action. Yes? Rima.
Anything about its dosing or route of, that is different than the other options?
It's more complex to use in terms of dosing compared to fingolimod because of that. You need to know the person's genotype. There's no known way to measure. There's no approved test to actually measure that genotype. It's got a super short half-life. So if a patient misses 4 doses, they have to retitrate up their first dose initiation. If they have any cardiac problems, they need to come back in for first dose monitoring. If they happen to end up on one of these concomitant medications that can either increase or decrease siponimod levels by 50%. You also need to adjust their siponimod doses, and it exposes an increased risk of toxicity or lack of effectiveness. And the short half-life is also a problem, and I think it's mentioned in the FDA report. In pure active relapsing remitting populations, fingolimod, after it wears off, fingolimod has a 2-week half-life. There is a risk of having severe rebound relapses. Some of those have been fatal, which is why there's now a warning in the label, and why siponimod got one also. So siponimod's 30 to 36-hour half-life is a real problem in the real world. If they don't pick their prescription up for 1 week, now the time starts for them to be at risk of rebound relapses if they have active relapsing forms.
Dr. Cohen?
So I'd just say that short half-life is a two-edged sword. It's also an advantage if you want to discontinue a medication. Certainly there has been the reports of rebound, but those are relatively rare with fingolimod. I think there's about 50 case reports out there out of 170,000 people that are taking the drug, and how many I have stopped it, I don't know. People regularly stop it to get pregnant. They regularly stop it for a variety of reasons. So I think while rebound is certainly a concern to be monitored, I don't think it's a clear issue to be concerned about in terms of the half-life of the drug. I think the advantage of being able to stop it quickly may actually be an advantage. More to the point, though, I think is the issue of we're dealing with a disease in which we have significant impact, where small changes may have significant impact on quality of life, on a person's ability to continue daily activities, and the amount of support that they need, maybe the difference between them working and not working. And so in a situation in which we have no clearly established drug, and the only other alternative is a drug that causes leukemia and heart failure, that's mitoxantrone, which none of us use anymore. I think we need to have as many options as possible that we can offer a patient in the event that whatever we're giving them at the time, and these people will all be on medication coming in, just by definition of secondary progressive MS. It starts out as relapsing, so they're all on medication. I think we need as many options as we have.
So we've heard, I'll come back to you in 1 sec. I just want to make sure I get quick. And we will capture, hopefully, the richness of this, some views on the potential advantages, I guess, from the shorter half-life, concerns about other aspects of its delivery. because I think this really will be a piece that you don't find in the clinical trial and that policymakers are going to want to obviously talk a lot to clinical experts and others about. Okay, why don't you do that quickly? And I'll
Just one minor clarification. The spontaneous reports that led to the labeling for fingolimod, as we all know, is a gross underreporting. In studies of women stopping fingolimod to get pregnant, the risk of severe relapse during pregnancy is about 10 to 12%. So it's not really that rare.
Okay, let me go to Holly and then over to Albert.
Hi, I just wanted to pick up on something that Dr. Cohen said, which is at this stage of the disease, any change has a significant impact, both in terms of activities of daily life and family effects. And I just wanted to read a few short comments from the open-ended questions that we included in our survey, which I think are often a lot more insightful than the quantitative results as well. When we ask people about how does SPMS affect their daily life, they say everything is more difficult. I can't do the things I used to do. I can't go places. I am retreating from life. I am no longer independent, and we all value our independence. And I'm isolated. I'm alone every day. And we ask, what effect has SPMS had on your family? They say that my family has to do more work because I can't do it. They're concerned. They're worried. They're scared. They're sad. They pity me. The family can't do what they like to do together anymore. They get impatient, they get frustrated, they make financial sacrifices, they make me feel like a burden. There are divorces and separations mentioned. They say their family's in denial, they don't get it, and they start to distance themselves from the person with MS. So I think when we think about what we want DMTs to achieve for people with SPMS, it really is we want them to keep people from becoming completely dependent on others. We want them to help keep families together, and we also want to prevent financial devastation for our patients. So any effect, anything that any DMT can do towards those goals is a meaningful effect.
All right, thank you. Albert?
Thank you for being here, and thank you for telling us about the patient experience. It's very important. So here, for this question, we're supposed to identify things above and beyond what was included in the analyses, either benefits or disadvantages. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask Lisa, can you talk about how you accounted for, I think I understand how you accounted for benefits, including lost work, absences, early retirement. Can you talk about drug side effects? Are those accounted for also in the analysis?
They're not. Okay. We did not include adverse effects in the model. We were looking at the clinical trial to inform which we should include. And there may be some adverse effects that we see in clinical practice that were not picked up in the trial. But for now, we relied on those that occurred in more than 1% of either arm, and those were generally mild and would not have made a large impact on the cost-effectiveness analysis.
All right. Ravi, and then Ryan.
Just to follow up on a point that Holly made, quantitative reporting of patient-centered and caregiver-centered and reported outcomes those were not captured in Expand.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, anybody? Oh, sorry, Nick.
So I'm struggling with the kind of what the question is asking. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, I think obviously the clinical trials don't pick up the benefits to caregivers if their patients improve. On the other hand, there's this wiggle word in C about significant impact on improving return to work. And so I'm struggling between two ways of understanding it. Does the model or the clinical trials fail to account for certain features that I think are important? It's a yes. Given the modest outcome results, I would think that those benefits are not significant, at least to the overwhelming majority of families that might be affected by this. So I'm struggling with how to think that through.
You're thinking about it, to my mind, exactly correctly. So you identify whether would be an opportunity for the drug to provide a significant impact in that area, and it is a kind of a multiplicative, I guess, question, because then you have to multiply that by, does it help patients? So if this takes a very disabling condition and makes patients a lot better, it would have a big impact on caregivers. If it doesn't, even though any marginal, if you will, incremental benefit means a lot to patients and families, it may not translate through into a significant impact on the caregivers in terms of their ability to go back to work themselves or whatever, that kind of phase shift would be.
Thank you.
Ryan? Sure. And then Ryan, and then we'll try to...
I would just briefly like to say that in this case, when we're dealing with a progressive disease, the benefit is not really measured in improvement. The benefit is measured in absence of change.
Yeah, good point. Ryan, go ahead. Did you have something?
I just want to, just to Nick's question, Nick, just for the people in the audience that are not at this table with the, I would ask that we probably change these in the future. We use, in the way you summarized our options, for C, you use significant impact, but for A, you don't put the word significant on the screen, but it is in our paper that it is a significant reduction in caregiver family burden. So
that's correct.
I think we need to be careful with
the
words we put up versus the words in our packet.
Yeah, just because it gets hard to read the full version, but that's a very good point. Every one of these involves a factor of judgment around the word significant. So, and that goes for reducing caregiver family burden, and it's whether the novel mechanism will allow, successful treatment of many other patients, right, for whom other treatments might not have worked. So, your point's well taken. All right, we want to talk about the broader contextual issues as well. So, Albert, I think your tent is probably still up from your earlier question. Why don't we go ahead and vote? Now, again, you're voting on all that apply. So here it's A, B, or C. We didn't have a strong D introduced. So what I'm going to need to do here, since I can't tell electronically when you're all done, is I'm just going to look to see your eyes. If you're looking down, it means that you're still voting. If you're writing, I know what you're doing, so that's also you've voted. But I see Harold voting. Tim, you've done? Okay. Everybody's voted? Okay. So here's what the answers show. All right. So 6 out of 17 said significantly reduce caregiver or broader family burden. You can see 0 for novel mechanism, 1 for significant impact on improving work, and 4 for other. So the 4 for other, let me just quickly canvass the group to make sure that we capture what you were thinking of when you voted other.
Yeah, I struggled a little bit with A because it wasn't explicit, but in listening to Ann and others talking about their experience, obviously social isolation, not feeling high energy is hard to quantify, but actually becomes an antecedent of our next topic, depression, right? So to me, these things are important, intangible, as intangible meaning not well documented in the trial.
Okay, so that would be, in a sense, clinical benefits for the patients, which I guess could in some ways extend obviously to their families, that wouldn't have been captured by the standard outcome measures in the trials. Okay, so noted. Anybody else who had an other, either disadvantage or advantage that they want to make sure we capture? Tim?
Well, I didn't put anything down because I just, from the evidence, I guess it's a potential other benefit, but I didn't see any data suggesting that it provided any of that. So I think we need to look at it and evaluate it. So I didn't vote.
Okay. Albert?
As I sort of forecasted with my question to Lisa, so the economic evaluation does account for some of these benefits because it extrapolates it from the trial findings, but there's no extrapolation of potential harm. We don't know what the long-term harms of the drugs are, so that's just something I think that's an other.
Okay, so you actually have an other disadvantage. All right, thank you. All right, the contextual issues are these. Let me read them again. So we're looking about whether you think, I'm going to read, maybe I should read the full version. This intervention is intended for the care of individuals with a condition of particularly high severity in terms of its impact on length of life and or quality of life. B is this intervention is intended for the care of individuals with a condition that represents a particularly high lifetime burden of illness. So you can sense that we're trying to seek something about severity, almost acute, if you will. The other is lifetime burden. C, this intervention is the first to offer any improvement for patients with this condition. D, I think say compared to the comparator, which is best supportive care. No, sorry. This, yes, still best supportive care. There is significant uncertainty about the long-term risk of serious side effects. E is about there's significant uncertainty about the magnitude or durability of the long-term benefits. And F is other. Any specific comments? Let me invite the patient representative, certainly, because sometimes we always look to you for our understanding of the context in many different ways. I think people do recognize the lifetime burden of illness aspects of multiple sclerosis, but is there anything else you'd like to comment on in terms of these issues before the panel votes?
It's just that I'm sorry. Yes, there is a lifetime burden financially, emotionally. So if, again, I would like to see this, that there are important considerations for you folks to answer here in these questions. And as I said, I hope they're positive for that of the patient.
Okay, thanks. Any questions or comments? Anybody thinking they're going to vote in a way that others won't, and therefore you should share your thinking with them so that they can be enlightened by your view of the situation? Okay. Oh, Annetta, please.
For the other, compliance is such a critical issue for this drug, and we all know that that's a really hard thing to achieve in any indication.
All right. All right, thanks. Why don't we go ahead and vote? Again, all that apply. And either look up at the screen or at me when you're done. Okay, everybody looks like they're done. Okay, here out of 17, we have 12 out of 17 say it's high severity, 13 say it's high lifetime burden of illness, 2, the first to offer any improvement, 10 is the one about, I think, long-term uncertainty about side effects, 13, significant uncertainty about long-term durability of benefit, and 5, other. All right. I want to first ask, did anybody who voted no, 4 people out of 17, and I did think I waited for everybody, did not say that it was care of individuals with a high lifetime burden of illness? Just want to check my understanding of that vote. Yes?
So I think that MS has a high lifetime burden of illness, but I believe that the quality and the method and the duration of analysis, that is the multiple years that are put into this and the way the analytic method was constructed, accounts for it. And so I think my question was, is it an additional consideration that would somehow adjust my thinking of the quality in a way that would be consequential? And I arrived at the conclusion that no, it does not. It indeed has a high burden of illness, but it does not change or alter my assessment of the long-term value of money.
Okay. Let me jump then to the other, I think, unless somebody else has a specific comment on that topic. I just wanted to find out again what the others were, other contextual considerations. Reem?
So I actually think this kind of highlights that we all truly feel the burden of the disease for the individual and society and caregivers. Actually, other to me was in the other direction, where I think we need to consider that there is other available options, and that at least one of them may become generic. And this is an important consideration in the big picture. I do also realize that it's important to have multiple options available, so it goes both ways.
Okay. Thank you. Other people who put other? Tim?
So I want to emphasize again that I believe this high severity, high lifetime burden, I think we've all heard that loud and clear, and it's really made an impact on me. But for me, the issue was, does the drug improve these things? And I continue to be concerned about our certainty from one study, hearing about the likelihood of representativeness and the likelihood of scope creep and the possibilities of harms, and the modeling data that really is using, since I've been on CEPAC, is using data from a very narrow piece of information and having to extrapolate a lot from that. I just think there's so much uncertainty about net benefit and value. Although, having said that, despite all of that, we're not getting anywhere near the ICER value aspects. But I think the benefit-harm aspect is really concerning to me.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that will allow us to transition into our policy discussion, which is going to be about 30 minutes. Are you kidding me? We need more for that. But we're going to try and figure out what we can fit in because there's some really important policy issues. So the ICER team can come away from the table, and I'd like to invite two other members to the policy roundtable. Oops, careful. Why don't you guys come on up? Everybody else can stay put. We are going to get, and for CEPAC, please use your tenant cards again if you have something. I've got some specific questions that I'm going to try to lead everybody through, and we'll see how we do with time.